In 1948, Budweiser ran an ad calling Thomas Jefferson our first spaghetti maker. For decades since, that idea has calcified into American folklore. The genius founding father, fresh off a trip to Europe, single-handedly introducing the country to macaroni and cheese. Here's the problem. Jefferson never cooked a single meal at Monticello, not one. He didn't know how to season a pot or light a stove. So if Jefferson never touched the food, who actually built the dish sitting on your Thanksgiving table right now? The answer is a name you were never taught in school, and the real story is far darker and far more impressive than anything on a beer commercial. To find the truth, we don't start with Jefferson. We start 11 years before that ad, in 1784, with a 19-year-old enslaved man named James Hemings. But James wasn't just any laborer. He was sharp, literate, and ambitious in a world that gave him no legal right to ambition at all. When Jefferson was appointed U.S. minister to France, he didn't bring a translator, he didn't bring a personal secretary, he brought James. Why? Because Jefferson wanted Monticello to have a French-trained kitchen, and he wasn't about to learn French cooking himself. So Jefferson enrolled James at one of the most prestigious kitchens in Europe, the Château de Chantilly. There was just one detail Jefferson left out of the arrangement, a detail that's about to matter a lot. Here's the detail Jefferson conveniently never advertised. Under French law in 1784, any enslaved person who set foot on French soil could legally walk away and claim their freedom permanently. No master, no plantation, no return ticket required. James Hemings knew this. So did his younger sister Sally, who was also brought to Paris. He could have disappeared into the streets of Paris a free man, with a trained culinary skill set that would have made him employable anywhere in Europe. He didn't. We don't know exactly why, whether it was family ties, fear of an unknown life abroad, or a calculated bet on a better deal back home. What we do know is that Jefferson was acutely aware of the leverage he'd just lost, and it would shape every interaction between the two men for the next decade. While training in that French kitchen, James learned a dish the French called macaroni pie, pasta boiled, layered with cheese and butter, and baked until golden. That recipe is about to cross an ocean, and the man carrying it gets none of the credit. By 1787, James Hemings had risen to chef de cuisine, head chef in Jefferson's Paris kitchen, cooking for European aristocrats, scientists, and writers at Jefferson's table. When Jefferson returned to Virginia, James returned too, still enslaved, and took over the kitchen at Monticello. Historians have a document that survives to this day, a macaroni recipe written in Thomas Jefferson's own handwriting. For 200 years, that handwriting has been cited as proof that Jefferson personally engineered the dish. But Monticello's own historians now say something different. That recipe was almost certainly dictated to Jefferson by one of his enslaved chefs, likely James himself, or one of the women he trained, Edith Hearn Fawcett. Jefferson held the pen, he did not hold the knowledge. And in 1790, that knowledge would help shape the future of the entire country on a dinner most Americans have never heard of. On June 20th, 1790, Jefferson hosted a dinner now nicknamed the Dinner Table Bargain. Around that table sat Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, bitter political rivals locked in a stalemate over the nation's debt and where the new capital should sit. By the end of that meal, they had a deal. Hamilton got federal assumption of state debts. Madison got the capital on the banks of the Potomac. Washington, D.C. exists in part because of an agreement struck over dinner. Who cooked that dinner? James Hemings, a man with no legal rights, no wages comparable to the white chef he replaced, and no claim to his own labor, fed the men who decided the geography of American power and walked away from the history books entirely.
But 4 years later, James would do something almost no enslaved person at Monticello ever successfully did. He would negotiate.
In 1793, James proposed a deal to Jefferson: train another enslaved person to cook at his level, and Jefferson would grant him freedom. Jefferson agreed, in writing, in his own words, citing the great expense of having trained James, as though James's labor were the debt, and not Jefferson's ownership of another human being. For 2 years, James trained his younger brother, Peter Hemings, to take over the Monticello kitchen. In 1796, the terms were met. James Hemings, at 31 years old, became one of only 2 people Jefferson ever enslaved who successfully negotiated their own freedom. You'd think that's where the story ends. It isn't. 5 years later, Jefferson, now President of the United States, wanted his old chef back for the White House. James, now a free man living in Baltimore, said he'd be honored to serve before anyone else in the Union. But he asked for one thing: a formal letter of engagement with the terms of employment in Jefferson's own hand, the same basic professional courtesy any free white chef would have received automatically. Jefferson refused to write it, because putting it in writing meant addressing James as a man with rights, not as a possession that could simply be summoned. James Hemings never returned to the White House. In 1801, at just 35 years old, he died by suicide in Baltimore. The very next year, in 1802, the first documented mention of macaroni and cheese being served at Monticello appears in the historical record. James never read that mention. He never saw the dish carry his name into legend, because for nearly 2 centuries, it didn't carry his name at all. It carried Jefferson's, stamped onto beer commercials, repeated in textbooks, baked into American mythology as a story about a curious founding father with a taste for European luxury. Meanwhile, the man who actually trained in Europe, actually learned the technique, actually cooked the dish that built a capital city, fought for his own freedom twice, and died without ever tasting the credit history owed him. Thomas Jefferson didn't bring America macaroni and cheese. James Hemings did, and it took us 200 years to finally say his name out loud.